everyone, and welcome to I Read an Article. Not really a series title, I suppose, but it is what it is. No TED Excellence today. Work concerns both earlier today and that'll be occurring after this kind of crunched my ability to prep one. So perhaps tomorrow we shall see. But I couldn't help but have my mind continue to linger on this particular story that we read last night on Lords of the Night, and some questions and curiosities I had related to it. So I thought I would go over it in a little bit more detail, as well as dive into a little bit more information on something behind the article. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, say hello to those of you who have decided to join me for this little adventure today. Wade Waleson, Jaeger Pony, Kiever Dam, Black Belt for Christ, Samuel Nation, Texas Attorney General Secret Agent, Zach Osborne, Zalbla, Dina B, Asian Hippie, Pink Hollow, the Driving Ape Man, 2 Cents Plus, hey, your boy Pat, hey, let's see, Roger Reynolds, Gunfox 61, Emperor WR Costin, Phil Thomas, Megan Ring, Lancelot 652. Yeah, see, I save all of the hellos for a TEDx. I try to keep these things, unique unto themselves. So let's talk about what we have here with the Nasdaq. So the Nasdaq is a U.S. stock exchange index, sort of like the Dow Jones and things like that. It's long and complicated to explain it all. But anyway, big Wall Street player. And they've done something that relatively recently, I did a video on regarding Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, the investment bank. They decided to issue a policy that said they would no longer assist any company going public with an IPO unless their board had at least one diverse member, their board of directors. And what constituted a diverse board of directors member? Anyone who was not male and or not white and or not straight. It was an interesting edict. And given that they're a bank, I had to wonder at the legality of it. Excuse me. Because there are laws about discriminating in investing or loaning money on the basis of race, sex, gender, and so on. And so that was interesting. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a dry throat today, so I may have to drink some water in between things. Hello, this is Kyle. Thank you so much. Hello, chat people and scribbles. Hello, Kyle. Appreciate it. But let's read this article here, a little bit more in-depth than last night. Nasdaq seeks mandatory board diversity for listed companies. Nasdaq is pushing the more than 3,000 companies listed on its U.S. stock exchange to make their boardrooms less overwhelmingly male and white by hiring directors that better reflect the country's diverse population. The company filed a proposal Tuesday with the Securities and Exchange Commission that, if approved, would require all companies on the exchange to disclose the breakdowns of their boards by race, gender, and sexual orientation. I'm going to read that last part again. Would require all companies on the exchange to disclose the breakdowns of their boards by race, gender, and sexual orientation. Companies that do not comply could be delisted or kicked off the exchange. The proposal would also require most NASDAQ-listed companies to have at least 2 diverse directors, or, if they cannot meet that mandate, to explain why not. That could include one board member who is female and one who is either an underrepresented racial minority or LGBTQ. Foreign companies and smaller companies would have additional flexibility in satisfying this requirement with 2 female directors. NASDAQ's plan ups the stakes in what was already a widening push by shareholders and governments around the world for more diversity on corporate boards, which often are composed of mostly white men. Excuse me. I'm just having all sorts of problems today. It's not just a sense of fairness. Oh, I agree. It's probably not a sense of fairness. Proponents say greater board diversity can improve financial performance for companies and ultimately their stock prices by bringing in varying opinions and voices and fostering a better understanding of employee and customer bases. In its proposal, Nasdaq cited a report from the Carlyle Group investment company, which found that companies it invested in that have at least 2 diverse board members have nearly 12% more earnings growth per year than the average of companies that lack diversity. Companies have heard the criticism and made some moves towards increased diversity, but progress has been slow. Women hold just 23.1% of board seats at companies in the Russell 3000, a broad index that includes most of the U.S. stock market. That's up from about 15% in 2016, according to executive data firm Equilar. Progress on improving racial diversity on boards has been slower. One difficulty is that tracking racial and ethnic diversity has been tougher than measuring gender diversity, with companies not often disclosing such data, something that Nasdaq hopes its proposal can help ameliorate. Yes, we need your report on the gender, race, and personal activities of your board members. Quote, corporate diversity at all levels opens up a clear path to innovation and growth, Nelson Griggs, president of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, said in a prepared statement. The SEC declined to comment on Nasdaq's proposal specifically, but it has made diversity a greater emphasis and released its first diversity and inclusion strategic plan earlier this year. Quote, we welcome dialogue on how to improve diversity, inclusion, and opportunity in the financial services sector and our economy more broadly, SEC Chairman Jay Clayton said in a statement. Shareholders are increasingly pushing companies to improve their board diversity, both in public and in private. Big investors are trying to cajole executives through private channels. For example, Nuveen, which invests $1.1 trillion globally, has been pushing a group of smaller and mid-sized companies without a woman on their board to add one. It's seen more than 30% of them add a woman as of 2019. Imagine putting a bounty on simply installing someone onto your board based on their demographic. You think any company would shy away from that option? Okay. In public, investors are getting more chances to vote at companies' annual meetings on shareholder resolutions seeking more disclosures on the makeup of the board. Governments are also requiring improved disclosures or mandating better representation. California was a high-profile example when it required all publicly held companies headquartered in the state to have at least one female director by the end of 2019, the first state with such an edict. After California, other states quickly considered following suit. Such efforts have met some resistance, though. In Illinois, State Representative Emanuel Chris Welch introduced a bill that would have required publicly held companies headquartered in the state to have at least one female director and one African-American director on the board by the end of 2020. Quote, I never expected a push for diversity to cause one of the most hotly debated bills on the floor of the year, said Welch, a Democrat. But that's what he said happened. Really? You never expected that? Really? Okay. Early opposition came from manufacturers who worried that they may need to kick someone off the board who was not a woman or an African American to comply. That could invite a separate claim of discrimination, even though manufacturers support diversity throughout the business, said Mark Denzler, president and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association. Yeah, can you imagine that? Can you imagine being kicked out of a job or an appointment or a position because you weren't the right gender or you weren't the right race in order to install someone who was the right gender or was the right race? Can you imagine such a thing? Golly gee whiz. The final bill, signed into law last year, no longer had the diversity mandate. Instead, it required only that companies report each year on their board's racial and gender breakdowns. Denzler's group was neutral on the final bill. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, officials were supportive of Nasdaq's proposal on Tuesday. Tom Quadman, executive vice president at the Chamber's Center for Capital Markets Competitiveness, called it an, quote, business-led solution to resolving diversity issues on corporate boards, unquote. Just a reminder, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is not a branch or a subsidiary of the U.S. government. I did not understand that for a good portion of my life. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is an independent organization. They have a fancy name that sounds like they're actually a part of the government, but they're not, just as a note. Quote, this proposal will help accelerate the developments that are already underway and is a positive and balanced way to get to the end result of allowing boards to be more representative of a business's consumer and employee base, he said in a statement. Let me read that one part again. a positive and balanced way to get to the end result of allowing boards to be more representative of a business's consumer and employee base. Allowing. The Nasdaq's U.S. exchange is dominated by technology companies, but there are many financial, biotech, and industrial companies as well. Nasdaq began in 1971 with the world's first electronic stock market and is home to many of the tech world's most iconic companies, including Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google's parent company. You mean Alphabet? Why not name it? In 2016, Adina Friedman became its CEO, the first woman to lead a major U.S. exchange. That's the end of the article. Interesting statements in there. Interesting conclusions. Interesting concerns. Reasonable concerns that this story doesn't seem to want to dwell on too much. A different kind of discrimination, they said. No, it's not a different kind of discrimination. It's the same kind of discrimination. Discrimination by gender, discrimination by race. But there's the article. But here's the part that I was really curious about. Because of everything in the article, the only sort of hard numbers I ever saw was this little bit here. A report from the Carlyle Group investment company, which found that companies it invested in that have at least 2 diverse board members have nearly 12% more earnings growth per year. I want to focus on that in a second here. But thank you, Pecoraro, Driving Ape Man, basically a vanilla version of Seize the Means. That's one way of looking at it. It's massive virtue signaling that gets down to the point of being antithetical, in my view, from the spirit behind the Civil Rights Act and subsequent legislation in our country. It's particularly equal employment opportunity laws and all that. Now, I understand, and for those of you that might be listening in the future or now who are going to correct me, I understand that board positions on a company function differently than being hired through a HR or employment process. You know, the law on who can and cannot be appointed to a board is a far murkier area, at least as I understand it, as compared to simply hiring someone for a position in your company, like a job interview and that kind of thing. I get that. However, this does not jive with the spirit of what our laws and our country purportedly are trying to work towards. And the concern brought up by the Illinois Manufacturers Association is a valid one. If they were mandated by law to put someone onto their board on the basis of their gender and or race, and their company bylaws only have X number of board members, well, they'd have to remove somebody to implant somebody, and they'd only be doing so because that person fit the demographic. Or at the very least, that person would be suspected until the end of time for only being there because of their demographic and not because they were qualified for it or had earned their spot or something. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the Carlyle Group investment company report, because I found the report such as it is. So let's pull that up here. The 2020 Impact Review. I believe this was published in August of this year. Diverse teams. What is a diverse team? Well, would it surprise you that in this entire long report of pie graphs and paragraphs and bullet points and charts, would it surprise you that the words race, gender, and orientation never appear? Not in this entire thing. Not once. What qualifies as diverse? Well, I don't know. The closest you get are things like this, where it says female employees. That's as close as they get to even mentioning something that has to deal with the requirements that Nasdaq is putting down onto its companies. But where's that 12% thing come from? Well, it comes from this. By promoting divergent viewpoints, we believe board diversity contributes to more deliberate decision-making processes and more effective governance. Good job. The data from our own company supports the growing consensus that diversity should be a priority of all funds with governance rights and influence, not just because it is a socially desirable outcome, but also because diversity improves decision-making and financial outcomes. Yeah, it doesn't just feel good to do it. There's also a monetary incentive to doing it. So they say. So where does this come from? Where do these numbers come from? Well, let's see if I can pull this out a little bit so I can read it. Doesn't say the number of companies, doesn't say what companies, just says the average, so on. But down here, over the past 3 years, the average earnings growth of Carlyle portfolio companies with 2 or more diverse board members has been nearly 12% per year, greater than the average of companies that lack diversity. See charts. After controlling for industry, fund, and vintage year, companies with diverse boards generate earnings growth that's 5 times faster on average, with each diverse board member associated with a 5% increase in annualized earnings growth. Do we get to see how that was all determined? Do we get to see the actual report itself, the study? No, not really. Now, where did they get this data? Who did all of this work for them on that? Well, that would be a company called HireVue. What does HireVue do? Well, HireVue is a technology company that assists companies with hiring through technology, algorithms, and facial recognition software, and other such things. Thank you, tall person. Happy Play Basketball Day, everybody. Play basketball? When was the last time I played basketball? I couldn't tell you. But thank you, tall person. Yeah, diverse teams, HireVue. Diversity is a central priority for many companies. However, businesses frequently struggle to find ways to expand their hiring pipeline, find more diverse candidates, and reduce unconscious bias in hiring decisions. HireVue's core business model helps solve these challenges. Yeah, and again, just for edification's sake here, let's see. Does the word race appear in here? Ah, there we go. Interesting. Candidate assessments aren't impacted by conscious and unconscious human biases. Wait a second. What? Oh, with their services. Candidate assessments aren't impacted by conscious and unconscious human biases that can have an adverse impact on even the most highly qualified candidates based on factors such as race, age, or gender. Each candidate is evaluated in precisely the same way based solely on job-specific competencies. The technology provides unbiased and highly predictive information that human recruiters then use to make hiring decisions. Oh, okay, so machines do all of this. No humans involved at all, basically. Okay. Well, let's see. What is how does HireVue determine what a diverse team looks like? Now, if we go over to their website, HireVue Assessments and Preventing Algorithmic Bias. Algorithmic bias. How HireVue works to prevent algorithmic bias. If you judged AI machine learning algorithms solely by the headlines these days, you might think that all algorithms are based on biased as we humans are, or worse, without deliberately working to eliminate bias that may reside in an algorithm's training data or its data scientist creators. Without working to eliminate bias in its data scientist creators. How do you... Algorithms are absolutely at risk of inheriting the biases of humans. From the earliest days of designing HireVue assessments, the team has been deeply committed to an ethical, rigorous, and ongoing process of testing and mitigating for the presence of bias in our HireVue assessment models, also referred to as algorithms. Okay, well then, HireVue, tell me about where in your process you filter for race. Oh, that's right. That word doesn't appear anywhere in this document. How about gender? No? Oh, okay. How about orientation? Oh, no? Oh, okay. Why not? Why don't you mention that? Let's see. Female. How about female? You put female in there? No. Nowhere in here. Huh. Interesting. Well, then what is diverse? What constitutes a diverse person? If you're going to appoint diverse people, why does the Carlyle Group not get any further than female? and HireVue doesn't even mention that in their assessment. Let's go to a different HireVue site here. Reducing bias and widening the candidate pool. Why we built HireVue assessments. Okay. Thank you, Corey AB. So glad I found your channel. Thanks to Metzger. Great content. I'd love to see James Lindsay do the show with you someday if possible. Happy holidays and best of luck moving forward. Thank you, Corey. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very appreciative to Kurt for having spotted me and bringing me on his show and then coming on my show a couple of times. James Lindsay, man, that would be a get. If I got James Lindsay on a TED Excellence, boy, oh boy, that'd be fun. I'm sure. I don't know if he'd be able to stand it, but I mean, that guy. You want to talk about a guy who's dived in head first into the social justice woke terminology world in the last couple of years. Him and his partners doing the oh god, I suddenly forget the name of it. The project where they submitted academic papers to see if peer review would catch how ridiculous they were. He's a little bit of a hero of mine. Just for the stuff that he's done. And yeah, I follow him on Twitter. But yeah, that'd be neat. Let's see. How do they reduce bias? Well, you have to tell us first what's the problem. Let's see. In 2012, after almost a decade of doing on-demand video interviews for companies around the world, we set out to use machine learning to begin predicting from the interviews which candidates would be the best fit for a specific job. What resulted from that effort is HireVue assessments, which collapse the traditionally separate interview and assessment steps into one step, improving the experience of candidates and reducing both implicit and explicit bias in hiring. Widening the talent pool with video first. From our decade in working with recruiters and hiring managers at corporations around the world, we knew that HireVue video interviews were solving a big problem for both recruiters and candidates. For one thing, video interviews were freeing candidates to record the initial screening interview by smartphone or laptop computer at the time of their choice without needing to travel to the recruiter's office. Additionally, HireVue video interviews were also relieving recruiters of the burden of ongoing scheduling demands and allowing them to review screening interviews at the times and places most convenient to them. What does that have to do with weeding out bias? Caption reducing. Here we go. Reducing the impact of unconscious human bias. Should be subconscious human bias, but either way. As we explored the potential to combine the interview and assessment into a single experience, we quickly realized that machine learning represented a very real opportunity to eliminate unconscious human bias in candidate screening as well. Here's the other thing that they never really talk about. Eliminate unconscious human bias. Do you have any way to eliminate your presumption of bias in other people? Because do you not have a bias of presuming that people are just going to make the quote-unquote wrong decision? Conscious bias in candidate screening as well. So when we sat down to design HireVue assessments, we wanted to do 4 things, all right? Ensure that there is a clear performance indicator that differentiates the strongest from the least promising performers. Okay. Ask the right questions to elicit responses that can be measured and that are pertinent to predicting job performance based on IO psychology research. IO psychology research. I don't know what that is. Have the machine notice everything present in the interview, what someone says and how they say it, and build a model that uses only the data points that help predict success in the job. Actively and methodically audit the algorithms to ensure that they aren't adversely impacting a group of candidates. Let me read that one more time. Actively and methodically audit the algorithms to ensure that they aren't adversely impacting a group of candidates. Then we look for ways to remove features that may cause biased results. Okay, so the first 3 points, for the most part, sound completely reasonable, but at the last there, you're like, what constitutes an adverse impact? Who decides what is adverse as an impact on the results of these things? What kind of bias is inherent there? I mean, just as an example, let's say that they put 100 candidates through their process, and of all the accepted candidates for jobs, 90% of them are men. Well, we can't have that. So there's a group or a demographic, which is probably more accurate, that we have to look at because they're being adversely impacted. So then do you methodically audit the algorithm to try to find a way to accept more women, even if by all your metrics previous, the men were getting the majority of the jobs? Or vice versa, whatever. Yeah, so Nasdaq took its cue from the Carlyle Group, which took its cue from HireVue, which takes its cue from deciding what's adverse in their algorithm hiring process. Or at least this, I think, reflects the philosophy behind how they arrived at their conclusion. Also, that little graph that showed the companies, like what's diverse, or like the three columns: not diverse, somewhat diverse, fully diverse, whatever that means. All these very abstract concepts. And rarely do they ever, especially on HireVue's site, talk about the specifics of what constitutes a diverse individual. Because they talk about diverse, but they rarely ever define it specifically. Yet NASDAQ has absolutely no problem saying, well, we want to audit these companies for gender, race, and sexual orientation. But with that in mind, I thought, as a close to this little review of what, and again, this is not some grand research project on my part. There are plenty of other things to look at in here, and I'll tell you what, I probably got some things wrong, or I didn't go deep enough into some things. I'm just giving sort of an overview of what I found just looking at some things today. But as a capper to this, I thought we would take a look at the NASDAQ's board of directors. Imagine that. Shall we look at the NASDAQ's board of directors? Okay, let's go. We've got a few minutes. Michael R. Splinter. Well, now, Michael could be a girl's name. There have been girls out there named Michael, but I can't tell. There's just a name here. Retired chairman and chief executive officer, Applied Materials. Oh, he's retired. Okay, but he's chairman of the board now. Okay. All right, well, let's look at his bio. Okay. Mr. Splinter. Okay, well, Mr. Splinter must be a male then. Okay, got that. Mr. Splinter was elected chairman of NASDAQ's board effective May 10th, 2017. He is a business and technology consultant and the co-founder of WISC Partners, a regional technology venture fund. He served as executive chairman of the board of directors of Applied Materials, a leading supplier of semiconductor equipment from 2009 until he retired in June 2015. At Applied Materials, he was also president and CEO. An engineer and technologist, Mr. Splinter is a 40-year veteran of the semiconductor industry. Prior to joining Applied Materials, Mr. Splinter was a longtime executive at Intel Corporation. Mr. Splinter was elected to the National Academy of Engineers in 2017. Mr. Splinter is a member of Meyer Burger Technologies Compensation Committee and TSMC's Audit and Compensation Committees. It says chair of the corporate governance, member of the Management Compensation Committee Charter, and chair of the Nominating and ESG Committee. You know what's not on here? His race and who he prefers to sleep with. But why not? This should be known. This should be published. A picture should be put up there so we can verify these things. And there should be at least a testimonial on there about who he likes to sleep with. We need to know these things. These are important things to know about people on a board of directors. Okay, well, let's see if we have something else. Melissa M. Arnoldi? Okay. Let's read her bio. Let's see. Well, okay, I'm assuming gender here, but anyway. Melissa Arnoldi is the chief executive officer of Vero Corp, AT&T's Latin America digital entertainment services business, which operates under the Sky brand in Brazil and the DirecTV brand elsewhere. Arnoldi oversees operations and is responsible for driving growth, innovation, and a superior customer experience for more than 13.5 million subscribers across 11 countries in South America and the Caribbean. She previously served as president of AT&T Technology and Operations, overseeing AT&T Communications global software development, supply chain, network, and cybersecurity operations, chief data office, as well as AT&T's intellectual property group, labs, and foundries. Prior, she served as president and CIO of technology development and held various roles in technology development and system strategy after beginning her career working as a senior executive at Accenture from 1996 through 2008. Member of the Management Compensation Committee Charter, member of the Finance. What's her skin color? Who does she like to have sex with? we have to know these things. These things have to be known. Nasdaq needs to tell us. Why aren't they? Why isn't there a picture there? Why isn't there some kind of, proof of the kind of people that they are romantically involved with? I need wedding photos at least. Okay. Well, I could go through all of the members of Nasdaq's board of directors. And I'll tell you, because I looked, none of them provide a photograph. None of them list off racial demographic or sexual orientation. And in those instances where the name is ambiguous as to gender, classically speaking, can't tell. I don't know. But gosh, and you know what? Geez, there's okay. Just going off of names, I know that that's a dangerous thing to do. But just going off of names, we have 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 men, and 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 women. So I just thought that interesting. Rules for thee, but not for me, as far as Nasdaq is concerned. And we need to know these things. We have to know the private lives of all these individuals. Now, if you can't tell that I'm being sarcastic, because personally, I don't care what Michael Splinter does in his private life. It's not my business. I don't care what his skin color is. You know what I care about? If I had to care about anything, all this. His personal experience. What merits him the position that he holds. And you know what? The fact that this is all that Nasdaq lists for its board of directors, just their little, work history or personal accomplishments in business and so on, that is fine. That is all that is necessary as far as I'm concerned. That's all that should be there as far as I'm concerned. And yet Nasdaq apparently thinks this isn't enough for everyone else. Nasdaq is going to require that if you want to remain listed with them, you have to disclose the physical attributes and personal proclivities of your board of directors. So I don't know how much more I can express just how ridiculous this is, how irritating it is, how infuriating it is to me that this is where we're headed. And Goldman Sachs, I suppose, was the first, at least in my radar, bellwether for what was coming. Because if Goldman Sachs decided to do it, it was only a matter of time. I think I even said that very phrase in the previous video. A link to that is in the description if you want to see that. But yeah, I just thought I'd do a quick little overview of the article, the events, and most especially this last part here. Nasdaq, don't tell me what Michael R. Splinter gets up to in his personal life. Don't tell me his skin color, and his gender doesn't mean anything at all either way. This is fine. And this is all that you should require, if you have to require anything at all, of the companies under your listings. That's it. And in fact, maybe you should let the companies under your listings run their business the way they want to rise or fall on their own merits as a business, and not by the dictates that you put over them. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I'm not an economic expert. I don't really get into arguments so much of free enterprise and things like that. But it just seems to me that might be a more fair way to do things. Just a little bit. Instead of you telling people what they have to do, and by extension, imposing gender, racial, and sexual orientation discrimination into some, 3,000 companies under your listing? Yeah. Anyway, I could say more, but I'm probably going to repeat myself if I haven't already, and I have. So if you guys have any comments or anything else, put them in the chat now. I'll read a few, and then I will wrap this up and go straight back to work, because that's what happens. Renovatio, everyone who is declared to have unconscious bias must wear the yellow six-pointed star. It is for inclusion, diversity, equality, and decolonization. You understand. Yeah. Corey A.B., like Shapiro once said, unconscious bias is a ghost of a ghost. It's something of a something, all right. It's a kind of original sin after a fashion. You have it, whether you know it or not, and it has to be weeded out of you and filtered away. Formerly Rodline, how can I invest without knowing where he, she, they want to stick or be stuck by genitals? I can't do it without that info. That, that is a vulgar way of putting it, but that's effectively what the Nasdaq is now saying. These things have to be publicly declared, even though it's nobody's business. And imagine this. I mean, just a vague, I'm sure it's a scenario that's never happened. There's somebody on a board of directors who's a white male who isn't out, doesn't want to be out. It is not necessary for them to be out. But then in order to retain their position on the board of directors or their reputation in business or anything else, they would have to disclose that publicly against their own wishes to satisfy the Nasdaq. Can you imagine being put in that situation? I can't. I wouldn't want to, but this is the future we have. Assassin the Gray, Scribelight, thank you for enduring this insanity. I don't know how you do it. Well, it is what it is. Having done these videos and watching the progression of things and just how it's become more and more comfortable for people to stand up on a stage and declare without any hesitation whatsoever that they are a company who cares first and foremost about filtering their employees and their workforces and so on by things that have nothing to do with personal merit in order to satisfy some, aesthetic, to avoid accusations of wrongthink. And the dangers that follow from such a mindset. It's just, and some of the more insidious ones, man, there was this one video I did. This lady was a diversity and inclusion consultant, and she was talking about what methods you would have to institute in order to do a diversity and inclusion process. And she mentions in there, and I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly, that you had to make sure that the hiring process duplicated the traditional process by all outside observance. Because basically she was saying, and you might call me a mind reader, I'll find the link to the video at some point, repost it, that your hiring process has to be instilled with a goal of diversity and inclusion, but can't look any differently. She was telling her clients effectively to institute racial and gender discrimination into your hiring practices, to actually not deal with unconscious bias, but to implement conscious bias into the process to reach a specific goal, not based on merit, based on aesthetics. This is Kyle Scribelight. How dare you, Scribe? Mr. Splinter could have identified as non-binary, you evil right-wing bigot. Well, like I say, Michael could be a girl's name. Michael could be a guy's name. It said Mr., but then as we know, nothing is set. So without a picture and some kind of public declaration on Mr. Splinter's part, I just can only make assumptions, which is a terrible thing to do, I'm sure. Prosaic Dreams in Blue. I'm pretty sure what the Nasdaq is suggesting is a violation of the Civil Rights Act. See, okay, and again, this I don't know. This is the legal morass that I don't know. In my previous video on this subject regarding Goldman Sachs, Goldman Sachs is a bank, and there are laws about discriminating who you do and do not invest or bank with based on race, gender, orientation, and so on. Nasdaq is a different kind of beast, and boards of directors, I don't know how that applies. If there is a law or a reading of the law that constitutes this being a violation of the Civil Rights Act in some way, shape, or form, I'd be curious to know it. But I don't know for a fact that they're actually breaking the law by instituting this mandate. I don't know that. All I do know is that the process that will have to take place at all of these companies based on Nasdaq's mandate, and the selections that will occur as a result, to me, if they do not violate the law by the letter, they violate the law by the spirit of it and by the aspirations of any American, as far as I'm concerned. So that's my problem. That's what bugs me about this. It's also the problem of this is indicative of where our society is going now. Between education, as I've done several videos on, between corporate America, which this is just one more, this is the kind of thinking that is trickling down into every decision. You want to talk about unconscious bias? This is becoming the conscious bias that's acceptable. Gender, racial, sexual orientation discrimination, period. If you're not the right type of person, you matter less in the long run. And I don't care what type of person you're talking about. That is not the right way to go. So I'm not quite sure why this needs to be explained. It's right there in the argument being made by the advocates of this. But they're advocating for the exact thing that they say that they're against over and over and over again. So with that, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I hope it was in some way, shape, or form informative. For those of you, and I know there are many of you out there who look into this kind of thing more deeply than I do, or have direct experience with these things more so than I do, please, please leave a comment in the comments below with your insight, with your addition to this. I will favorite those comments and pin occasionally. I can only pin one, but if there's one that's a good supplement to this, I will pin that too. If I've gotten anything wrong, if I've jumped ahead of something, if I made a mistake as well, put that in the comments. I don't want to believe that I'm infallible, because I don't. You know, and my self-esteem issues don't allow me anyway. So there you go. Everyone, again, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you all have a good rest of your day. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.